the impossible becomes reality. A young boy, pronounced dead not once but 3 separate times, defies the boundaries of life and death to return. When he opens his eyes, it isn't just life he brings back, it's a message so extraordinary, so awe-inspiring, that it could only come from a realm beyond our earthly understanding. A place of mystery, hope, and faith that so many of us ponder but rarely hear about firsthand. This is the astonishing story of Landon Whitley, a boy who stepped into the unknown, crossed the threshold of life and death, and returned with a powerful revelation. He claims he met Jesus, and what Jesus shared with him is something the world needs to hear. If you've ever wondered about the existence of the afterlife, or what lies beyond our final breath, this story might provide the answers you've been longing for. Prepare yourself for a journey that challenges logic, dissolves doubt, and dives straight into the heart of a divine enigma. But before we begin, if stories like this intrigue you and make you question everything you thought you knew about life, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss the revelations yet to come. Our journey begins on an ordinary Sunday in 1997. For the Whitley family, weekends were a cherished time, a blend of simplicity and togetherness. Their Sundays were filled with routine, a morning visit to church, followed by a drive home to enjoy lunch and relax as a family. This Sunday seemed no different. Julie Whitley, a loving mother, was chatting with her husband Andy as they drove through familiar streets. In the back seat, their young son, Landon, gazed out the window, lost in the peacefulness of the day, unaware of the life-altering events just moments away. The sun streamed through the car windows, casting a warm, golden glow on what felt like a serene drive home. But in an instant, everything changed. The quiet rhythm of their day, the comforting normalcy of family life, was about to be shattered in the most violent way. Suddenly, out of nowhere, an ambulance sped through an intersection, sirens blaring. The Whitley family had no time to react. Their car was struck with such devastating force that it spun wildly out of control. The collision brought with it the sound of crunching metal, shattering glass, and an impact so severe it left Julie dazed and disoriented. The nightmare unfolded in mere seconds, tearing through their peaceful day like a storm crashing down in broad daylight. When the car finally came to rest, an eerie silence blanketed the scene, pierced only by the haunting wail of ambulance sirens that were now painfully close. First responders arrived quickly, but the sight before them was grim. The vehicle was mangled beyond recognition, crushed by the force of the collision. Inside, Andy Whitley had already lost his life, taken in an instant by the crash. Julie Whitley was trapped in the wreckage, alive but gravely injured. Rescue teams worked urgently to free her from the twisted remains of the car, but their eyes kept shifting to the back seat, where Landon's small, motionless body lay. He wasn't breathing. Landon's condition was critical. Paramedics rushed him to the nearest hospital, fighting desperately to keep him alive. His pulse was faint, his breath shallow, signs that his fragile body was slipping away. Despite their tireless efforts, the unthinkable happened. Landon was declared clinically dead. The medical team refused to give up, pushing their skills to the absolute limit. Yet, there was no response, no sign of life. It seemed as though Landon's journey on Earth had ended before it had truly begun. Meanwhile, Julie, still grappling with her own painful injuries, received the heartbreaking news of her husband's death. The weight of the loss crushed her spirit, but even in her overwhelming grief, she couldn't fully process the tragedy. Her thoughts remained fixed on Landon. She clung to a fragile thread of hope, desperately praying for a miracle, even as doctors warned her to prepare for the worst. In the operating room, the fight for Landon's life continued. Twice more, his heart stopped. Twice more, the doctors declared him dead. And twice more, against all odds, they managed to revive him, though barely. Each time he flatlined, it felt as if the veil between life and the afterlife was being drawn back, revealing a space where he hovered between two realms. Unseen forces seemed to tug him back and forth, as if his very soul was caught in a cosmic struggle. The medical team worked relentlessly, their expressions a mix of intense determination and quiet despair. Despite their best efforts, the situation felt increasingly hopeless, a battle to hold on to a life that seemed destined to slip away. Julie, drowning in fear and grief, turned to prayer. Her prayers weren't mere words, they were raw, desperate cries from the depths of her soul. She begged God to spare her son, pouring every ounce of her faith into her pleas. The loss of her husband had already shattered her heart. Now, the thought of losing Landon too was unbearable. Through her tears, she whispered over and over, "Please, God, not him too. Don't take him from me. Not my little boy." For the doctors, it was a race against time with an outcome they believed was inevitable. Landon's chances of survival were slim, and if he did manage to pull through, the prognosis was bleak. They feared severe brain damage was unavoidable. How could anyone endure being declared dead 3 times without catastrophic consequences? They braced Julie for the harsh reality. If Landon woke up, he might not be the same boy she had once known. He could lose his memories, his personality, everything that made him Landon. But Julie's heart refused to accept this grim fate. Deep down, she believed her son's spirit was stronger than his fragile body. She clung to a fragile hope that Landon would return to her whole, not broken. Days turned into weeks as Landon lay in a coma, his body sustained by machines, his face pale and still. Julie never left his side. She held his hand, whispering prayers and words of encouragement, willing him to come back to her. Her unwavering presence was a testament to a mother's love, a lifeline she hoped could reach him wherever he was. The medical team, though diligent in their care, wore expressions of quiet skepticism. They had seen too many similar cases, and the outcomes were rarely what families hoped for. But somehow, Julie felt that Landon's story was different. As the machines beeped steadily, marking the rhythm of life in the sterile hospital room, Landon's body remained unresponsive. Yet his spirit was far from still. He later described what happened during those weeks as an extraordinary journey, one that would forever alter his life and the lives of those around him. While his physical body lay tethered to tubes and monitors, Landon's consciousness ventured far beyond the confines of the hospital. He spoke of being lifted out of his body, leaving behind the sterile beeps and hums of the ICU. Suddenly, he was in a realm that defied earthly description, a place so vivid, so peaceful, it felt more real than anything he had ever known. He stood in a field of pure, radiant light, a light that seemed to pulse with life itself. Colors were more vibrant, and the air resonated with a harmony that transcended sound. It wasn't a dream. It was as if every sense had been heightened to its fullest capacity. Landon was certain of one thing: he had crossed into heaven. The roads were paved with shimmering gold, glowing as though they were alive. The air wasn't illuminated by a sun, but by the place itself, as if the very essence of this realm was light and love. It enveloped him, filling him with a peace so profound that it seemed to erase all earthly concerns. And then he saw them. Figures bathed in a golden, gentle light began to approach. At first, they were distant silhouettes, but as they drew nearer, recognition dawned. These weren't strangers. They were family members who had passed long before he was born. Faces he had never seen in life, but somehow knew as intimately as his own. The connection was instantaneous, an unspoken understanding that transcended words or time. Though the experience was shocking, it felt entirely natural, as if he had always been meant to meet them. Julie held Landon's hand tightly, her tears falling freely as she whispered, "You're here, baby. You're here." She couldn't believe it. Against all odds, her son had returned, not just alive, but alert and vibrant. It was as though a piece of heaven itself had been handed back to her. Landon's voice was soft but steady as he said, "Mom, I saw Dad. He's okay, and I saw Jesus. He told me I had to come back." Julie froze, her breath catching in her throat. Landon's words were spoken with a conviction that couldn't be feigned. She listened in stunned silence as her son began to recount everything he had experienced, every detail of the golden roads, the figures bathed in light, and the profound peace he had felt. When he mentioned the 2 children who had greeted him, Julie's heart nearly stopped. She knew who they were. They were the siblings Landon had never met, the ones she had lost before he was born. Her eyes widened as she realized there was no way he could have known about them, unless what he was saying was true. As Landon spoke about meeting Jesus, Julie felt a shiver run through her. The way he described the love and warmth emanating from him was unlike anything she had ever heard before. Landon's voice trembled slightly, but not with fear, with awe. He told me it wasn't my time yet, that I had to come back to tell people that heaven is real, that God loves us, and we all have a purpose. The doctors and nurses who had gathered in the room to witness this miraculous moment exchanged glances of disbelief. They had seen Landon's lifeless body. They had declared him dead not once but 3 times. Yet here he was, speaking with clarity and conviction, recounting an experience that defied every logical explanation. It was a moment none of them would forget, a moment that made even the most skeptical among them pause and consider the possibility of something greater. In the days that followed, Landon's recovery astounded everyone. Tests revealed no signs of brain damage, no lasting physical effects from the trauma he had endured. It was as though his body had been restored by a force beyond human understanding. Julie, who had clung to her faith throughout the ordeal, now saw it as more than just a belief. It was proof that miracles were real. As word of Landon's story spread, it touched the lives of countless people. Strangers reached out, sharing how his experience had reignited their faith or given them hope in their darkest moments. Landon embraced his mission wholeheartedly, speaking about his journey to anyone who would listen. He told them about the beauty of heaven, the love of Jesus, and the unshakable truth that death was not the end. For Julie, life would never be the same. She had lost her husband and endured unspeakable pain, but she had also witnessed a miracle that reminded her of the strength of faith and the boundless love of God. Every time she looked at Landon, she saw not just her son, but a living testament to the power of hope, love, and belief in something greater than ourselves. As Landon continued to share his story, his words began to resonate far beyond the walls of his small town. News outlets picked up on the miraculous tale, and soon, people from all walks of life were drawn to him. Some came out of curiosity, others seeking validation for their own beliefs or hope in the face of grief. Julie, still grappling with the enormity of what had happened, stood by her son's side. She watched as he spoke to roomfuls of strangers, his small voice carrying a message that seemed to bring comfort to everyone it touched. Despite her own sorrow over her husband's absence, Julie found solace in Landon's words. It was as if he had brought back a piece of heaven not only for himself, but for her as well. A reminder that love transcends the physical world. One day, Landon met a woman who had recently lost her daughter in a car accident. With tears streaming down her face, she asked him, "Do you think she's there too?" Landon didn't hesitate. "I know she is," he said softly. "I saw so much love there, so much peace. Everyone is welcome in heaven." His assurance brought the woman a peace she hadn't felt since her loss, and she embraced him as if he were her own child. Landon's story sparked debates among skeptics and believers alike. Doctors were unable to offer a scientific explanation for how he had survived, much less for his vivid descriptions of heaven and the people he had encountered there. Psychologists speculated about whether his visions were the result of a brain under extreme stress, but even they struggled to account for the specific details he provided, details that no child his age could have known. But for Landon, it didn't matter what people believed. His mission wasn't to convince anyone, only to share the truth as he had experienced it. He often told those who doubted him, "You don't have to believe me. Just believe in love and in something greater than yourself." Over time, Landon's story began to inspire movements of faith and hope. People started to reconnect with loved ones, mend broken relationships, and find meaning in their lives. Churches invited him to speak, as did hospitals and grief support groups. Landon's presence had a way of filling rooms with light, much like the place he had visited. For Julie, life was bittersweet but beautiful. She mourned the absence of her husband, but found renewed strength in her son's recovery and purpose. She would often sit quietly, listening to Landon recount his experiences, feeling the warmth of his words heal the parts of her heart that grief had touched. Landon's story became a legacy, a reminder that even in our darkest moments there is light, love, and the promise of something greater. And for everyone who heard him speak, it was impossible to remain unchanged. Landon's miraculous return from the edge of death left everyone speechless. But the real impact of his experience only became clear when he began sharing the message he had received from Jesus. The first time he spoke about it, he was still frail, lying in his hospital bed with a voice so soft it was almost a whisper. Yet the strength in his words was impossible to ignore. He spoke deliberately, carefully choosing each phrase, as if he understood the profound importance of what he was saying. "Jesus told me it wasn't my time," Landon said, locking eyes with his mother, as though the message was meant just as much for her as for anyone else. "He said I have a mission, that I need to go back and tell people about him, to let them know that heaven is real and that our lives have a purpose far beyond this world." For Julie, hearing her son speak in this way was like stepping into a dream. It didn't feel real. The Landon she had known before the accident was an inquisitive, playful child bursting with energy. Now, sitting before her was a boy who seemed transformed, filled with a calm wisdom that was far beyond his years. His words carried a depth and gravity that made her wonder how such an incredible experience could have happened to her son. Why had Jesus chosen him? Why was he entrusted with such a message? And how would it change their lives from here on? As Landon's story began to spread, the responses were a mixture of wonder and disbelief. Many were deeply moved, inspired by his incredible recovery and the hope he brought to their lives. In a world so often clouded by doubt and uncertainty, his testimony shone like a beacon. Those mourning lost loved ones found solace in his words, clinging to the promise of a heaven where they could one day reunite. Churches extended invitations, and soon Landon was sharing his story with congregations, community gatherings, and anyone willing to listen. Despite his tender age, he spoke with the confidence of someone who had lived through a lifetime of experiences. His voice carried a quiet strength, one that seemed to come from a place far beyond human understanding. However, not everyone was convinced. Skeptics challenged the truth of Landon's story, claiming his visions were nothing more than the hallucinations of a brain deprived of oxygen, a natural response to trauma rather than a divine encounter. They cited scientific studies on near-death experiences, explaining how chemical changes in the brain could create vivid imagery of golden roads and angelic figures. To them, these were the mind's desperate attempts to cope with fear and chaos. But Landon never wavered. He didn't try to debate or prove anyone wrong. Instead, he simply shared what he had seen and felt, leaving others to draw their own conclusions. His unwavering calm and sincerity gave his words a quiet power that resonated deeply, even with those who doubted. Julie found herself overwhelmed by a whirlwind of emotions. On one hand, she was filled with deep gratitude for her son's survival, but on the other, she struggled with an intense, lingering sorrow, a painful emptiness from losing her husband. Andy had been a wonderful man, a loving father, and Julie couldn't understand why God would take him away while giving Landon back to her. During the quiet moments, when she was left alone with her thoughts, the questions arose on their own. Why had God spared her son, but not her husband? Why had he shared this profound message with Landon and not with her? There were no simple answers, and it took everything Julie had to find a way to reconcile her heartache with her faith. As time passed, Julie's outlook began to change. She came to realize that her anger and confusion were natural parts of the grieving process, but they didn't have to control her. Landon's words stayed with her, especially the ones about the overwhelming love and peace he had felt in heaven. It was a kind of reassurance she had struggled to give herself. Slowly, she started to accept that there might be a greater plan at work, a reason behind the events that had unfolded. Julie found herself praying not out of desperation, but out of a sincere desire to connect with the divine in a way she hadn't felt before. Landon's experience had opened a door in her heart, allowing her to take comfort in the belief that Andy was now at peace in a place filled with love and light, just as her son had described. Landon's journey was far from easy. His recovery was a long, painful process, full of physical therapy, surgeries, and moments of intense frustration. His body bore the marks of the accident, constant reminders of the trauma he had faced. Yet, He approached these challenges with quiet strength. It seemed as though he carried an inner resilience that went beyond physical recovery, a strength rooted in the experience he had in the afterlife. He never complained about the pain or the struggles of his recovery. Instead, he focused on the mission he felt he had been given, using every moment to share his story and spread the message of hope and faith he believed was his calling. As the years passed, Landon continued to speak publicly, sharing his testimony with ever-growing audiences. He was no longer just a boy who had survived a terrible accident. He had become a messenger, a living symbol of something greater than himself. He traveled to churches, schools, and conferences, often speaking before hundreds or even thousands, recounting his experience with a humility and sincerity that deeply moved everyone who listened. He spoke not only about the beauty of heaven, but also about the love he felt from Jesus, a love so pure and unconditional that it brought tears to his eyes every time he described it. For many, Landon's story became a beacon of comfort and hope. Those who had lost loved ones found peace in his words, taking them as a sign that their departed were safe and happy in the afterlife. Even skeptics found themselves reconsidering their doubts, moved by the sincerity of his testimony. It was impossible not to feel the powerful impact he had on everyone who heard him speak. He had a remarkable way of connecting with people on a deep emotional level, as if tapping into a universal yearning for proof of something beyond this world, something greater than the struggles we face every day. Julie watched her son with a mix of pride and awe. She had always known he was special, but she could never have imagined the extraordinary path his life would take. She saw how his message brought healing to others, how it restored their hope and renewed their faith. In a way, it helped her heal too. Each time she heard Landon speak, a little bit of her own sorrow would lift, replaced by a growing sense of peace. It was as though she was witnessing a greater plan unfolding before her eyes, a divine tapestry where every thread had meaning, even the painful ones. Landon knew that his life had been forever altered by his experience, and he embraced this transformation fully. He understood that his mission wasn't just to share what he had seen. It was to live in a way that reflected the love and light he had encountered in heaven. His goal became helping others find their way back to their faith, reminding them that hope is always within reach, even in the darkest times. He saw himself as a bridge between two worlds, carrying a message of comfort and love from one to the other. And he knew that as long as he had breath in his body, he would continue to share his story, fulfilling the mission that Jesus had entrusted to him on that day in heaven. In the end, Landon's story wasn't just about a boy who returned from the dead. It was about a message that transcends time and space, a message that speaks to the core of what it means to be human. It's a reminder that we are all part of something much bigger than ourselves, that our lives hold meaning beyond what we can see or comprehend. And for those who hear Landon's words and embrace them, it's a message that can completely change the way they perceive life, death, and everything in between.